Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where in the world you are. We are so very pleased to have with us Gemma Black. And I think that you are all aware of her eminent name. She has been such an influential calligrapher. Her works are in private collections, in museums, universities. And today I have requested for Gemma to come and talk to us about one of her very seminal works, the Apologies, which she did for her government, the Australian government, and she's going to tell you the background, the inspiration, and the process. And so, without further ado, Gemma, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dorothy, and welcome everyone to this talk. The subject matter of a couple of the apologies is very deep and very dark. However, and I certainly won't make light of anything, but it's not going to be a depressive talk. I've really enjoyed what Dorothy has prepared for us for the past week, and Eleanor's the process and the works that she has done. So without further ado, allow me to share with you some of the apologies that have been made by our governments, but also a couple of other little things that I've thrown in just to for you to enjoy, and also for you to know and to understand a calligrapher's position, particularly in this country. So here we go. Of course, when we get to the end, we can do questions, and we can have a little bit of a chat about anything that you would like. Okay. So at the moment, you should see a full screen with the apologies. Myself, Ngunnawal country. I live in Ngunnawal country. That means the Aboriginal word for Canberra, which is the English word that was a misrepresentation of an Aboriginal word that was Canberry for meeting place. And the nation of people who lived in this area were the Ngunnawal people. In Australia these days, we have very happily welcomed Indigenous names for our areas. There is no Indigenous name for Australia, and both Indigenous people and everyone else who lives in this country, all other Australians, we all share the word Australia in common. So if you're in another area, you come from the name of the nation of the Indigenous people. So just to explain that for you. As an artist, I firmly believe that it is the duty of an artist to tell the story and the truth of their own time and that of their own country. I believe that this is my job in my calligraphic life to do what I do, but it also means that I enjoy my craft very, very much, not only for commissions and things that I do, but also enjoy the technique and also bringing words to other Australians and to other people around the world. I have many friends who are artists, and they do that very thing. They share the stories and the truth-telling of where they live, why they live there, and their reaction and response to the world that they live in. Mm-hmm. In 1770, Captain James Cook landed at a place that is now called Botany Bay, home of the Euroa people, and claimed possession of the east coast of Australia for Britain under the doctrine of terra nullius. I'm letting you know this information just to set the scene so that you will understand a little bit, just a tiny bit, of the history of the country in which I live. So according to international law of Europe at the time, in the late 18th century, there were only 3 ways that Britain could take possession of another country. 1, if the country was uninhabited, Britain could claim and settle that country. In this case, it could claim ownership of the land. 2, if the country was already inhabited, Britain could ask for permission from the Indigenous people to use some of their land. In this case, Britain could purchase land for its own use, but it could not steal the land from the Indigenous people. 3, if the country was inhabited, Britain could take over the country by invasion and conquest. In other words, defeat that country in a war. However, even after winning a war, Britain would have to respect the rights of the Indigenous peoples. So, strangely enough, Britain did not follow any of these rules in Australia. Since there were already people living in Australia, Britain could not take possession by settling this country. However, from the time of Captain Cook's arrival, the British government acted as if Australia were uninhabited. So, instead of admitting that it was invading land that belonged to Aboriginal people, Britain acted as if it was settling an empty land. This is what is meant by the myth of terra nullius. And therein lie the crux of Australia's past and subsequent trauma to this nation. Fast forward 250 odd years, we still do not have a treaty with our Indigenous people. It was only in 1967 that the country voted in a referendum to change the constitution so that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders be counted as a part of the population, and that the Commonwealth would be able to make laws for them. Very interesting times. So what you can see here is the Australian coat of arms. And it is this coat of arms that is one of the most enjoyable parts of what I do as a calligrapher when it comes to telling our story. The only way to change a constitution in our country is to hold a referendum. And that referendum is by mandatory vote, which means everybody must vote. I'll tell you about a referendum that's coming up, but just a little bit later. Okay. You'll see this coat of arms quite a few times in this talk. This is our Parliament House. As you can see, a number of you will have been here and some of you are yet to come here. We have the most amazing mosaic in the forecourt of our Parliament building. And our building goes in through here and down into the most marvelous brand new 1988 building. And it's in this building that the apology manuscripts are held. In 2008, I was alerted to the fact that our Prime Minister was going to apologise to Australia's Indigenous people for the barbaric treatment that they had endured over the last 200 plus years. The British were not the first to come to Australia, but they were the first to colonise Australia. The French were on their tail, neck and neck, up the east coast of Australia. The Dutch were already in Western Australia 100 years earlier, and not only in Western Australia, they were in Tasmania as well. So we could have been colonised by others. We could have been speaking French, or we could have been speaking Chinese, because the Chinese were here bartering with the Indigenous Australians, I believe, as early as the early 1400s. So an interesting, premise to the building of this country. When the Prime Minister, previous Prime Ministers had decided not to apologise to Australia's Indigenous people because they believed it wasn't their fault. However, Kevin Rudd, a Labor Prime Minister, on his first day of Parliament, made this apology to Australia's Indigenous people. And here you can see the rendition that I created. I went to the Speaker's office because I was already working for the Parliament at that stage on a variety of things. I was the parliamentary scribe, the go-to calligrapher for major documents, and also for all the visitors' books. The visitors' books are extraordinary. They're a collection of introductions and signatures to every international state visit that this country has seen. And those books go back 200 years. And for my time period, I'm the one that was creating all the information into these visitors' books for our two houses of Parliament, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Our system of government follows the British system of government, the Westminster system of government. Here you can see a lass looking into the hermetically sealed cabinet. When I spoke to the Speaker of the House, I said, the apology manuscript, the apology that the Prime Minister is about to give should be written onto a skin called vellum. And a vellum skin will last for at least 1,000 years, if not 2,000 years. And the reason, of course, as you all know because of your interest in calligraphy, is that our vellum books of the past, of which we only hold in our collections a minute amount of the documents that were ever created, have lasted over 2,000 years. Right from the early scrolls, the Hebrew scrolls, papyrus hasn't lasted, will not last as long as vellum. Vellum is calf skin, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But the minute I said that this document with your signature, it is so important to tell the future of our country and everyone else who comes to this country, that this is what went on in our past. So this apology was, for me, a very major step in my calligraphic life, because here I was, a little calligrapher living in Canberra, creating a piece of work that was going to last for a long, long time to come. So I'm going to talk about the making of the manuscripts, but not until we look at a couple of other apologies. Here is a close-up, but not the closest image that you will see of the apology to Australia's Indigenous people. Children were taken from their families. One of the biggest groups of Indigenous people are known as the stolen generations. And children, I think 3 children in 5 were taken away from their parents and sent to missions. And there's a number of films and there's a number of documentaries that you can look up and find out a whole lot more. one of the most moving tales is the rabbit-proof fence. If you ever get an opportunity to see it, it's extremely moving, but certainly worth watching, about 3 young lasses who ran away from their mission and followed the rabbit-proof fence. So this apology was one step forward in a movement that this country is hoping will end in treaty. We are one of the only countries in the world that does not have a treaty with its Indigenous peoples. New Zealand does, our favourite neighbour. They are so ahead of Australia, many countries. And so this was the first step. We make an apology, and then the next step is coming. In the 1940s, 50s and 60s, the United Kingdom sent children to Australia, boatloads of children to Australia, who were victims of the Second World War, where Europe was in conflict. Children were sent for their own protection to various countries, but a majority of them came to Australia. A number of those children suffered at the hands of institutions, and subsequently had very, very traumatic things done to them. Many of them didn't even know that they had other brothers and sisters, or if they did, where they were. Some of the children were told their parents had died in the war, and this is the best thing for you. We'll send you out to start a new life in a new land. So we're talking about children as young as 3 and into their teens, sent out on these boats to Australia. So on the last day of our Prime Minister Kevin Rudd's year in office in 2013, he made an apology to the forgotten Australians, the former child migrants. There was a lot of lobbying going on in this country about making an apology to the former child migrants. Many of the child migrants actually made very good lives for themselves, and many of them didn't. And it was a huge stain on our country for not being able to accept these children and look after them, and to give them the riches that this country really did offer those who were born here, or certain areas of our population who were born here. So this apology was extremely emotive. And as a professional calligrapher, I put myself in the position, same with Australia's Indigenous apology, of reading the document, feeling the emotion of the words that go into these documents, and then getting into a frame of mind where I knew that I couldn't turn these documents into decorative, fancy pieces of work. The most important thing is the text. The text needed to be clear, precise, not over the top, a little bit of flair. And you can see that there in the small illuminations, which you'll see larger soon. Of course, there's another coat of arms. I get to paint the coat of arms all the time. As I said, it's my pure joy. It's my getting to the end of the document, and I then can paint the coat of arms. I'll talk about the length that these take a little bit later. So that was our second apology. And here's a little close-up of the very first line in that document: apology to the forgotten Australians, the former child migrants. A lovely little italic there, not too flash, not too plain, just a an open, even italic that will be able to be read in 500 years' time, in 1,000 years' time. In 2013, Prime Minister Julia Gillard apologised, made a national apology for forced adoption. So just so that you understand what this apology is about, I've got a little background note here. On February 29, 2012, the Senate Community Affairs Reference Committee released its report into the Commonwealth contribution to former forced adoption policies and practice. The report includes 20 recommendations, several of which relate to a national apology that identifies and acknowledges the experience of those affected by forced adoption practices. The report found that the policies and practices that resulted in forced adoption and the removal of children were widespread throughout Australia, particularly during the mid-20th century. The Senate Committee inquiry received submissions from hundreds of individuals who had suffered from the effects of forced adoptions and found that there were many different ways in which the forced adoptions occurred. The accounts provided in the report range from experiences of mothers being drugged and physically shackled to beds to social workers failing to advise mothers of government payments that may have been available to support them to keep their children. Forced adoption practices impacted a large number of Australians and caused significant ongoing effects for many people, particularly mothers, fathers, and adoptees. The report estimated that there were 140,000 to 150,000 total adoptions in the period between 1951 and 1975, and potentially as many as 250,000 total adoptions in the period from 1940 to the present day. However, the report concluded that it's impossible to know the exact number of people affected by forced adoption practices because so many girls went unreported. On the 23rd of June 2012, the then Attorney General, the Honourable Nicola Roxon MP, announced that the government would formally apologise to those affected by forced adoption practices. While an apology cannot undo the suffering experienced by those by forced adoptions, the apology was offered in the hope that it would provide a significant help in the healing process for mothers, fathers, adoptees, and other family members who were adversely affected by these practices. The apology was also intended to help educate the broader public on the experiences of and the impact on those affected by forced adoption policies and practices. In this country, as in a couple of other countries around the world, in particular Ireland, there were government bodies that proactively carried out forced adoption processes. I also know that there are some people who worked in a number of those homes or had something to do, their work had something to do with taking children from their mothers because it was socially unacceptable to have a child out of wedlock in this country, who retrained in their work and turned around and started to actively and proactively help those people who were now suffering from a variety of mental illnesses, trying to help them get through the shaming that went on in this country. And I do know for a fact that this national apology that was given by Prime Minister Gillard was extremely, well, the day was gut-wrenching, I have to say. I was there in the Great Hall when the apology was given. And everyone was crying. We had men, women, grown, older, in their 80s, in their, 70s, in their 60s, bawling, literally, sobbing as the apology was being given. And it was extremely moving. We have just had in this country the 10th anniversary of this national apology. So this document is going to go a long way for our future generations to know and hopefully not repeat, although we do know as people who are citizens of this earth that history does repeat. But let's hope that this goes some of the way to healing a little. I've popped this image in so that you can see the side of that document. You can see the vellum that it is written on, and you can actually see the veins in the calf skin. And that is one of the pure joys of working on vellum, is that it is animal skin and it has a life of its own that is going to last, if protected, for, as I have mentioned, thousands of years. You can also see, not so much in this image, but you can see the paw marks when you're working, the hair paws on the vellum, and the difference between vellum being calf skin, coming from the word vellum, coming from the French velin, V-E-L-I-N, from the veal, meaning calf. Parchment, on the other hand, just to be clear, is actually split sheepskin. The sheepskins are so thick, they can split into two, and they are perfect, for writing on. And we have a number of split skin parchments that are written on in this country that were mostly indentures and land title rights. And they too will last for thousands of years if well looked after. And it was one of the main points that I took to the government when I lobbied for them to have that very first document, the Apology to Australia's Indigenous People, created, so that they would last. Otherwise, as I said to them, and I've said many times since, they would only end up as an A4 piece of paper in some metal filing cabinet somewhere in the bowels of the archive. So it was an important step for me as a calligrapher to actually, go to the government, tell them the story, and very happily accepted. Another apology to victims and survivors of institutionalized sexual abuse. Like many other countries, institutionalized sexual abuse is also related to religious organization abuse, not just religious, but mostly in this country. I'm sure you all know the stories. They're coming out all over the world, have done for the last 20 years. Prior to that, no one talked about being a survivor of sexual abuse. And yet many have undergone that sort of sexual abuse and still remain silent to this day. So this was also another major apology. Many of the religious institutions, and of course it's not all religious institutions, it's only some institutions, but it's not the institutions, it's the men and the women, mostly men, who perpetrated this child sexual abuse because they could, because they had the power. And so this document, again, is an extremely emotive document that tells the story of what happened to many of the children in institutional care. They were there for protection and for care, and our country couldn't care less. So in 2018, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, made this apology. Excuse me a moment. So, creating these documents. Here you can see where I've created the heading and the coat of arms is already painted here. However, the main text of this document is already done and it's underneath this very large sheet. Here you can see the vellum. You can see parts that are slightly yellowing. The older the calf, when the vellum is prepared, the more colour it is likely to have. The longer it has lived, the more likely the skin will have discoloration. To work on vellum, you have to prepare the skin. So one needs to understand how to create the skin as smooth as possible. The vellums come, for me, from one of two places. The vellum works in Ireland, and my contact there is Joe Katz, and William Cowley's, and I've got another story to share about William Cowley's in the UK. Many works I've written on with William Cowley's vellum. Working on vellum, it is the most beautiful surface to work on for a calligrapher. You might think that working on a watercolor paper or a very fine art paper to be beautiful to work on, nothing compares to the velvet touch of vellum. There's a little sort of close-up of that same slide that you just saw. For some reason, and I'm not too sure why, I put on all those lovely little decorative leaves on that. So to work a document, I have my drawing board, perhaps just one higher than what you can see here. And I have a large roll at the bottom because the documents are so big that I need to be able to roll the vellum under the table and between myself and my legs underneath. And so it protects the vellum from crushing. And I have to say, I only put the roll there every time I use a big vellum document. Otherwise, I don't have it there. Working at a very sloped board is excellent because I can see clearly what it is I do. Here are a few scraps of vellum, and I'll say they're scraps of vellum because they're very, very discoloured. No, they're not discoloured. They're very, very coloured in the sense that I would not do a government document on this type of vellum because it is so patchy. I like a skin of vellum to be not pure white, but a beautiful cream colour without too much patchiness. However, I work a lot of collaborative work with bookbinders, and I will often create calligraphic pieces according to what they've commissioned me to do. And these vellum pieces then become a part of their bindings. So it's another part to working on vellum, not just documents. For your information, just in case you have never seen vellum on a stretcher before. So these are very, very large stretchers in the William Cowley factory. It's a very smelly and a very dirty job. As some of you will already know, you need to dip the skins into vats to remove the hairs, and then these are put on stretchers so that the skins are scraped with a large semicircular knife to smooth the entire skin from top to bottom, from neck to haunch. And there you can see the ribs around the side and the spine down through the center. And the purer the vellum makers can get it, the better for us. We are not the only ones that use vellum. There's another group of musical practitioners who use vellum, and and the timpanist that I know very, very well here in Australia, he and I get our vellum from the Vellum Works in Ireland. So drummers, timpanists, even acrylic and plastic skins and manufactured skins for drums are not as good as vellum. Inks I use are inks that are traditionally proven to be stable after 200 years, 300 years, 500 years. And we know that stick inks that are carbon-based, that are mixed with an animal glue, will last for thousands of years. And so here you can see one of my favorite ink sticks that I like to use on a regular basis for all my documents that have to last. And we know it does. So I don't use any bottled ink at all. These two beautiful, a very, very old vermilion ink stick there, you can see. There's no point in doing a document that's supposed to last for 1,000 years if your tools and if your materials are not going to be stable. So we have to actually look back to history to make sure that we are using materials that will not fade, will not eat away at the vellum, or whatever it is you're writing on, the paper. One of the things I heard just recently is, you know, that smell when you go into a bookshop, it's the smell of paper dying. And that is actually what it is. Paper will die and vellum will not. Here you can see just a couple of bottles of my pure pigments. I like to mix my pigments in sort of the fun side, or the sort of the joy of going to the table and working at my craft in a non-professional or non-commissioned way, is I'll use all sorts of things. I'll use tube watercolors, I'll use acrylic inks, I'll use all sorts of things, don't get me wrong. But when it comes to documents, I like to use very stable pigments. And so here you can see a small range of my very large range of pure pigments, and I mix them with a number of different substances according to what it is I'm doing. And those substances can be glare, which is the white of egg. And there's a wonderful recipe for glare in the Calligrapher's Handbook by A&C Black. There's a number of calligraphers' handbooks, so don't go out buying, just you have to look for the right one, by A.C. Black. Glare is the white of egg that has been mixed into a meringue mixture, so, you know, peaky, and then left overnight. And the glare is the residue that is left underneath that separates. And if you mix that with your pigment, that pigment is going to last on your work for 1,000 years. And you also know that egg tempera, which is the egg yolk, it's these days known as egg tempera, but in the olden days it never was, is the egg yolk. And what that does is it actually gives the pigment a lift. It keeps the pigment high and glossy. You know what it's like getting dried egg off a plate. Well, it's just like that. It's extremely stable. Excuse me. Okay, I don't use quills. I do cut quills for a bit of fun. I get my students to cut quills. They're great to write with. There are a number of calligraphers I know who may still support the use of the quill. By all means, go ahead and use it. It's beautiful to use. But for large amounts of work, as I experience in apology manuscripts, or any long citation for that matter, I don't use a quill. They've been superseded by the metal nib. Here's a close-up of the steps that I'm taking to do these type of documents, where everything is done with an aluminium bowl base. So even though this looks quite, oh yes, I've already done the inking in, right? So I lay all my designs down with aluminium bowl. It's a very, very fine earth pigment, and it's soft and beautiful to work with, really lovely. So all the lettering is done first, all the lettering, because if I'm going to make a mistake, the lettering, that's where it's going to be, in the main text. And then I draw up the coat of arms and the little illuminated letters. And then my very next step is laying the gold with a bit of gesso. You paint your gesso into where the raised and burnished gold's going to be. And in this case, it's just a couple of the illuminated letters. So all those apology manuscripts that you saw, the gold comes next, because if you're laying gold leaf, genuine gold leaf, it will or may stick to the gold. Sorry, if you're laying gold, if you've already painted, the gold leaf may stick, especially if you've used egg yolk or glare. Okay, so the gold comes next, and then the color. Oops, that's the other end of that line of writing. It was a very long line that the forgotten Australians, the former child migrants. And then you lay the colour thereafter. And the filigree and the drawing up of the actual letters is done with, in this instance, walnut ink. And the coat of arms, my favourite part. I really hate to harp on that, but you get to the end of a very long and large document and you breathe a sigh of relief. I'll tell you another story in a minute, but I do all my swatches. Swatches are an important part of what I do. Every one of my students knows that they have to prepare swatches for everything. If it works, you take a piece of the vellum that you're actually working on, not a different piece of vellum, the piece that you're working on, and you do a swatch. And if it works on the swatch, it'll work on the main piece of work. So here you can see that I've got some watercolor pencils that I hone to the colors. Now, the coat of arms is the 1912 coat of arms for our country. There was one earlier that was a dreadful coat of arms, 1904, I think it was. But this one, the 1912 coat of arms, is our official. And to this day, this is what is painted on any official documents. Of course, there are stylized coats of arms, bringing our documents into modern day work for all the printed documents and also for objet d'art works of the coats of arms. And here you can see the document's finished. It's upside down. It has to be upside down, otherwise I can't reach it. So once I've drawn it all up, I turn it upside down and I paint it and I gild it and so forth. So it's not quite as straightforward, but let me tell you that the coat of arms takes at least 16 hours to paint. So if I don't get advance warning of an Australian document to do that includes the coats of arms, then I could be in trouble. So this is not an apology. This is the Royal Proclamation on Inauguration Day in the year 1900 by Queen Victoria. And this proclamation establishes Australia as the Commonwealth of Australia. Now, that looks like a really old document with a beautiful little, almost copperplate style. Let me tell you, I actually did this document. All our founding documents were not as well preserved in this country in the first part of the last century. And so the National Archive of this country put away the 4 main founding documents and had commissioned me to recreate them. I worked with the conservation and preservation officers from the University of Canberra in an effort to make the documents a hand facsimile of the original, not only once, but twice. So these documents have been done twice again. They are hand documents. They are an absolute hand facsimile. So this one here says duplicate. That's got nothing to do with it. This original document had the word duplicate at the top because England had one and we had one. So basically what we did is we made an iron gall ink. That is the type of ink that was used on the original document. The vellum that was used came from William Cowley's parchment makers in the UK. And we know that because the National Archive of Australia has the receipts of that is where the vellum came from. So I created these documents, forging the signature of Queen Victoria. This information was embargoed for many, many, many years. And now I am able and have been given permission to talk about it because the documents that are on exhibition at our archives, you can go in and see them the next time you come to Australia, have written beside it, this is a hand facsimile, but what you're looking at is this. And we've aged them. Well, I didn't. Ian Batterham, my officer in charge of the commission, had them aged so that I had to literally sit on that person's hand and recreate exactly. And when you look at the 2 documents or the 3 documents, they are identical. And I'm very proud to say that I was in a position to be able to do those, to keep these documents for future generations. The Queen's Assent that enacted Australian Constitution, the founding of the Commonwealth of Australia. So this is actually the Royal Assent, and it's a back-to-back. So what you can see here is a photograph of the front of the document and a photograph of the back of the document, which was very common in those days to actually write on the other side of the document, of course. And this is also been recreated by myself, someone else's hand. I had to study, recreate, and again, recreate Queen Victoria's signature. It's amazing what conservation and preservation officers can do these days. If you think about it, they are actually doing the reverse of what they are trained to do. Okay, one more of our founding documents, the letters patent to create the office of the Governor-General of Australia. So you can't have a Commonwealth, you can't have a country that is following the Westminster system without having a Governor-General. So the Governor-General is the the King's representative in our country, the same as other Commonwealth countries around the world. My Canadian friends, of course, New Zealand friends, all bear the same type of history. So these are lithographs. So the lithographs that were the stones that created the images, their prints around the outside. Everything else is handwritten, but The lithographic stones were still held by the National Archives, so new prints were created onto vellum. They're as ugly as far as I'm concerned. However, my job is not to say, I think they're ugly, but you know, others may not. So my job again was to put myself in the scribe's position and recreate the hand that created this original document. And again, there's one of mine in Parliament House in Canberra. There's 4 of mine in Parliament House in Canberra. And this one, not this one of the other ones you just saw, excuse me, is on exhibition. And beside it, it says, this is a hand facsimile, all right? Some of them have my name, some of them don't. So, interesting life is a calligrapher's. All right, I was going to show you an apology manuscript video, but in the change to my brand spanking new computer, I've lost lots and lots of documents that I cannot find, and it is one of them. So rather than show that to you, because it is a lovely video, you do get a lot of the Prime Minister speaking all the way through it. So I decided that what I would do in this case is show you this little video, and it's not the apology, obviously, but it is a very short video of me working on vellum. And it's part of my Book of Kells talk. So there is one thing I'll ask you to do. It does have a music line that goes with it. So just be prepared to check your speakers are not turned too high. So just check that as soon as this starts. You might need to have your finger on the button if you've got a very high volume going on. All righty. This is only a 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 4. Okay. Well, as you can see, that's a completely amateur video, but here is the finished piece where I took a couple of lines directly out of the Book of Kells and recreated them on a small piece of vellum. It's not that small, actually. It's about larger than A3 size or larger than double letter size. And here you can clearly see the beautiful grades of colour of the vellum. And I've also, and I do like to use the backbone of the animal if I can. And here you can see the backbone right there through the middle to the off to the right slightly of this little piece of work. I do have to say, if you have never worked on vellum, or if you've never worked on split sheepskin before, parchment, then, you know, get yourself some and have a go. You'll just absolutely love it. There are some ways of preparing the skin, and that is quite simply using some pumice powder to get rid of any impurities on the skin, because sometimes they can be a little bit on the greasy side. And also once you've done that, you can then add a little bit of gum sandarac so that it's absolutely perfect to write on. Okay, so I'll run through these fairly quickly. There's other things, of course, that calligraphers do and that I do. The Declaration Against Modern Slavery. Modern slavery is pandemic in a number of countries around the world, and even here in Australia. I mean, we have no idea when you go into a hotel whether, you know, the young girl or the young man in another room are being kept there. You know, they've come to Australia and their passports have been taken away from them, and they have to work off their passports because, you know, they couldn't pay to get here. And so this modern slavery is really again another horrific thing, and it's not just Australia, it's the world over. And so one of our large corporations here, run by Andrew and Nicola Forrest, the Minderoo Corporation, employed a bookbinder and myself to create these two books. And here you can see me working on the parchment, and it's, as you can see, the Declaration Against Modern Slavery. So these were bound about, there's 100 pages in each book. They're identical books, and they travel the world and collect signatures of civic leaders, religious leaders, ordinary people in the street. I discussed with the Minderoo Corporation that they should have a colophon. And of course, they weren't aware of what a colophon was. And so I let them know that in the back of traditional manuscripts, you have what's called a colophon, which is a tailpiece that, excuse me, everyone, sorry, allows the reader to know when the book was written, who it was commissioned by. There are many, many colophons in medieval manuscripts. That's where we take our lead from. And again, the lettering in the manuscripts are very clear, very precise. They're not flourished in any decorative or highly embellished way. It's very straightforward. And again, it's work that can be read in future generations. And this was a wonderful project for a calligrapher and a bookbinder. I work a lot with Joy and John Tonkin, bookbinders here in Canberra, and the books were bound, as you can see here. They were slipped into their Solander boxes, which are those archival boxes. And then the Solander boxes were, they travel the world in specially designed suitcases when they do travel. Here is an image of the knocking up of the leather frontispiece of the Solander case. And these books, again, are going to last for many, many, many years. This was the Indonesian Freedom Network page. So, one of the things I enjoy most, of course, is playing at my craft, at my drawing board. And when I have some time, I really love allowing myself, making time my friend, and working with all the things that I enjoy teaching others. So my job as a calligrapher is a zeitgeist. It is being able to tell the story of my time. And so there we have it. We have a little talk on the apology manuscripts, what I do as a calligrapher, why I feel the way I feel about the work that I do. And here's our next generation. And hopefully they'll carry on, not quite calligraphy, but they'll carry on the traditions of what it is we do. So thank you. And if we have any questions, please.
Thank you, Gemma. Such a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. That is amazing. Yeah. Yes. Do you all have any questions for Gemma? You can type it in the chat, or actually there's it's possible to unmute and just ask directly. I do have one, Gemma. I wanted to ask you about, I mean, we're looking at all these fabulous pieces, and you seem to be, I mean, what happens if there are mistakes?
Oh, yes, I meant to say that in one of the pieces of work. I got to the very, very end of one of those documents. The very first document I did, the Apology to Australia's Indigenous People, I didn't make any mistakes. That was very fortunate. I actually worked on 2 documents at the same time because I didn't want to put myself under any pressure. So I cut 2 lots of vellum. And anyway, as it turns out, there wasn't a mistake. So I have one of my own copies. Every other document that you saw there tonight had a mistake in it. And working on vellum is pure joy. Pure joy. I don't know if you've heard the story by, my dear friend Sheila Waters. She tells the story of the spiral, the roundel of the season, where she decided she didn't like the middle panel. But because it's on vellum, you can scrape the surface and the ink or gouache or paint or pigment or gold or whatever it is you've got on there will actually come off the surface, and then you can burnish it and treat it, and you can write again. So one of those documents that you saw, but the mistakes were only minor, spelling mistakes as I've gone along. So what happens is you realize you've made the mistake, you just put a little asterisk at the side and you just keep going. You just keep going. And at the end of the whole process, you come back and you deal with it. But the worst thing that ever happened was I finished a document, no mistakes, and went to put my pen to the side, and I dropped it. And the pen dropped on the manuscript and went plop, 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 plop. Ink blot, ink blot, ink blot, ink blot. So I had to spend about 2 hours taking the ink, because it was vellum. I just spent that time and just scraped away all the excess ink that was in the background from the little drops of ink. I did swear, I have to say.
Wouldn't.
Heart stopping. Okay, Margaret would like to make a comment. You can go ahead and unmute, Margaret.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Gemma. I'm Eleanor's sister.
Oh, and you are? Yes. I can see the resemblance. Yes.
And she apologizes, by the way, to everyone. She's teaching this at, I guess it's afternoon now in Paris. So she's missing this talk. I wanted to comment on the vellum. I'm not a calligrapher, but I have studied paleography, which is reading of medieval manuscripts, of ancient manuscripts. And this was fascinating because I've got some insights of preparation and how they were written on by medieval monks mostly, and other scribes who wrote old French romances out and the kinds of things I study. I've seen hairs left over because they weren't scraped as carefully as they might be, color differences.
Yes.
I'm guessing, and maybe you can comment on this, I'm guessing that it's the same kind of preparation to a great extent, at least the stretching, the scraping, as was done. I mean, I'm a language historian, so I'm interested in what was written on them for the grammar of it mostly. But you certainly learn to deal with manuscripts made of vellum. And I'm just wondering about how much of it is a kind of enduring practice.
Thank you for the wonderful question. It's so precious. I think it is our responsibility, if people like me are working to produce documents that are to last for the time period we tell our governments that they're going to last for, that we must be extremely responsible and understand the stability of the materials that we use on certain surfaces. Vellum, we know, as you know, you are very fortunate to be able to study those manuscripts, number one, because they were on vellum. Paper wouldn't have lasted, or parchment, same. But as the technician or the scribe, it's my responsibility, and other calligraphers, not just me, to understand the pigments that you're using, the makeup of those pigments, whether they're ochres, earth ochres, or other earth pigments, or because we still have that reservoir of wonderful documents to study. One of my areas of expertise, believe it or not, is the Book of Kells, because I was responsible for giving the lecture on the tools and materials in the Book of Kells for the National Gallery of Australia. And so it's our responsibility to understand the makeup of those materials. And that's why we're still using glare, still using egg tempera, still using pure pigments, still mixing stick inks with animal glues, because we know that they're going to last for 1,000 years. And it's our responsibility. And if we don't do it, there's a number of brilliant books that are academic and technical books for calligraphers that guide us into learning and understanding about those pigments and those materials. And in my lifetime, I've studied as much as I possibly could to understand the stability of the materials that I use.
Thank you.
My pleasure. We should be in touch.
I will talk to Eleanor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Margaret. That was a beautiful question. And we have a few more. Let me see. Okay, Tess wants to ask, she says, I think you need immense patience in the correction process, the one with the ink blots. Do you need to let the ink or paint dry completely before starting to scrape?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, there's a little swear word, and there's a get up and walk away and come back in either 2 hours or 3 hours or the next day. And if you've got the time, and, you know, sit down, relax, get out your scalpel, a little semicircular scalpel, and just start the process. It's that or either do the document again, which is the choice of making the correction. And there's no real drama because of the nature of the vellum. It can be done. Yeah, so you do it. Dorothy, I can't hear you.
Sorry, can you tell us more about why you prefer the spine section of the vellum?
I like my vellum to have character. Most of the documents do have the spine, except they're not prominent, because for the the apology documents, the skin is very pure and very white and very young, from a young calf. And so you don't tend to get the skin discolorations as much, but you can see spine if it's pointed out. You can point it out, like on all of those images that you saw, they just looked like pure white paper, when in fact they were beautiful cream vellum. And when you look closely, of course, you can see the pore hair, the pores, the P-O-R-E-S, pores, you know, it's, no, I like it for character.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I think Ojas wants to ask, could you explain in layman terms the difference between manuscripts, codex, facsimile, etc.?
Okay. I hope I've been speaking in layman's terms. I am a bit of a layman. Codex is the first term that was used for a book in book. The book design as we know it, that opens and shuts in the pages, the folios that have been cut down and bound. So the codex form came after the scroll. So the scroll, even though if you think about a scroll, a continuous roll, they were actually divided in the scroll. The writing was divided into sections like pages. They weren't pages, but like pages, so that you could concentrate on this spot here and then just roll it along and concentrate on that spot. So that's scroll. When the book became a compilation of not just one leaf, but 2 leaves, 4 leaves bound together, and then a spine, it became the codex, the term codex for the book as we know it today. The term facsimile is really a copy. So a hand facsimile is a copy that has been made by hand, and it's you can have facsimiles that are just copies of the words that have been typed, or you can have a hand facsimile that is supposedly identical to the originals. I can tell the difference between the facsimiles, that I did, and the original documents. What I do can never be identical to that person who sat down and wrote it in 1900. I will get it as close as possible that the layman wouldn't know the difference, okay? But I can personally tell well, of course I can, because I know I did it. So in those 3 words, was there any other words I think I may have explained?
Psalter. What is a psalter?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Quite simply, a psalter is it's a prayer book. So psalters or psalm, so prayer books with little hymns in them, mostly biblical, of course. And so you have the psalters will be small books. Tend to be small books that in medieval times the scribes, the priests, whomever the psalters were made for, whether they were patriarchs or whether they were, members of the royalty, could carry their little psalters with them. Some of them were buried with their psalters. Some prayer books became quite rich and ornate, depending on who the commission was for, whether, royalty or whatever, but usually a personal prayer books with psalms. Dorothy?
Are there vegetarian calligraphers, and do they have alternatives for this kind of long-lasting work?
Yes, I'm always very, very aware of not only vegetarian but vegan in this day and age, and I can only say that calfskin and parchment will last. We don't know about synthetic skins. They possibly will last. Acrylics, it's plastic after all. We're trying to get rid of plastic on the planet. So is plastic the alternative? But it's not slaughtering an animal to get the skin to write on. So I am very aware. The entire Bible that was just was created by Donald Jackson and his team were vellum calfskin from unborn calf, the stillborn calf, I think, so that it was the purest of skins that were available. But yes, I am very aware, but I don't have an answer for an alternative. So
You're unmuted.
Thank you. That it was more just occurring to me that you have to use animals if you make this kind of material. And I know I'm not one, but I know there are people who would prefer not to. I assume they just don't do this kind of work.
Yeah. I don't know the answer right now, but at least I do. I am aware.
Thank you.
My pleasure, Jeff.
Nan wants to know if room temperature and humidity affect your calligraphing or gilding on vellum.
Okay, so yes, it depends. If you are going the traditional route, and in these cases for the manuscripts, I did take the traditional gilding route, and that means that when you're gilding with gesso, you need to have a really around about 77% humidity, and there are ways to create that. Sometimes in this country, we do have days that are very, very high in humidity, which are perfect for gilding, absolutely perfect. So you don't have to recreate. You don't have to get out the vaporizer and put it on in the studio to get the humidity up to a stage. Or as some of my English friends have told me they've gilded in the bathroom and turned the shower on so that they can get the rate of the humidity up, or the amount of moisture in the air. I tend to have a very good way of making gesso. Again, it's a traditional method, and in this country we can have a wet gesso and a dry gesso, one for various climates. We had a great guy who was making gesso for 2 different environments. So yeah, it can be problematic, but once you've worked with gesso for raised and burnished gilding, it's just something that you learn and you're able to do after a time, but it can be extremely frustrating. Gilding for flat gilding on gum ammoniacum is brilliant. It works all the time. It is not problematic. It's a traditional method of the gum ammoniac comes from the not the acacia, that's gum arabic. Oh, I've lost it. Yeah, anyway, you make it up from the gum ammoniacum crystals, and you soak it and you turn it into this glue, and then it gilds perfectly every time for flat gilding. Gesso for raised and burnished gilding, as you saw in those documents. Yeah, it can be fiddly. Now we've got all these wonderful gilding mediums all over the world. The Kohlner gilding medium that the miniatum where it raises quite high. I've used that quite a bit for more contemporary works. It's easy to use. It's not fiddly. You don't have to worry about humidity. But will it last 1,000 years, you see? If there's a question mark for me, I'll take the traditional option. But for my contemporary work, I use all sorts of things.
Thank you. Gemma, I wanted to talk about, the role, what you said about you being the zeitgeist, a voice for your time, the memory holder. And I remember in one of our conversations, you said something about, we talked about what can calligraphers do now if they are not in a position where they can, write national documents. And then you mentioned this exercise that you invited your students to do about writing the headlines.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I want to say something about that, because sometimes I think as calligraphers, we do look for things to write, and I feel that it's important we understand, the role that we have to preserve memory. So maybe you want to say something along that line?
Only to say that we don't all have to go to that level of writing documents for your government. I'm fortunate, and I'm extremely lucky to have been able to have stepped into that role, and the responsibility is on me to do that. But what I love doing more than that, I'm fortunate to have done that, is just telling a story about our own time. And if you don't want to do that, you don't have to do that. As long as you can find pure joy in what it is you do, then that is so meaningful. But if you did want to tell stories about your own time, write the headlines that are in the newspapers or on your banner on your phone where you get your news from. Write up stories that really affect you. It's important, I think. And then your children and your grandchildren or your friends or people can look back over them when you've gone, maybe, and really know that you understood the world you lived in. And I didn't know that you were thinking about that, or I didn't know that that affected you, or it's just a part of me. I read an article just recently because Stan Knight died, and I went through all my journals and pulled out all Stan Knight's articles from 1980s. Anyway, there was one article in there about "Do Scribes Think?" is what the article was called. It was about the words that we use as calligraphers, and think seriously about the words that you use. I see some of my friends' work come across my Facebook feed, and the words that they're choosing are words about what they're feeling at any given time, where they've been to. They will have a montage of words of places they've been to. Also, think deeply about what you write. Read more widely. Educate yourself to what you really feel and what's going on about the world around you, and write about that. It doesn't have to be serious. It can be pretty, it can be flamboyant, it can be basic, it can be whatever you want it to be. Just enjoy your work. Yeah, that's what I say. That's what I love. When I go to the drawing board, a day I enjoy is a day when nothing happens. So I can go to the drawing board and I can write whatever I want.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I don't want to keep you too long. Now it's 9:30. There are a lot of very positive feedback and messages, Gemma, about how interesting and fascinating and wonderful this presentation has been. I'm going to collect them and then send them to you via email.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna just stop the recording now.